coast to coast. And here's we got another breakers here as J.C. Sheldon goes right.
Caitlin Clark takes a hard hit, and what happens next tells a much bigger story. Her teammates don't simply stand around waiting for the officials to react. This is the story of how the Fever began showing that they would stand up for one of their own. Sophie Cunningham grabbing an opponent during a heated moment, then later using her podcast to question why the league wasn't doing enough to protect Clark.
But they're definitely targeting her, and the league and the refs do nothing to protect her.
She openly suggested that Clark was being targeted and criticized both the referees and league for failing to respond. Then there was the famous finger point that quickly became a viral symbol by itself. Teammates filling Clark's Instagram with messages of support, and the entire roster rushing toward her after a game-winning play. And the bigger picture becomes impossible to miss. These moments reveal something important about the culture inside the Fever locker room. So let's break down what happened and what these reactions actually say about the team. The moment Sophie Cunningham became Clark's protector. Every great sports story has a turning point, and for Cunningham, that turning point came during a 2025 matchup against the Connecticut Sun. Clark had already been receiving an enormous amount of physical attention, even by the standards of a professional basketball season. That night, Connecticut's J.C. Sheldon and Marina Mabry both became involved in physical exchanges with Clark that appeared to move beyond normal competitive contact. Cunningham wasn't interested in simply waiting for a referee to settle everything. Late in the game during a fast break sequence, she brought Sheldon down with a forceful foul that immediately got everyone's attention. It was obvious that Cunningham wanted to send a message.
That's a flagrant foul. It's a hard foul. You could say it's a play on the ball, but...
When Sheldon got back up and the situation appeared ready to become even more heated, Cunningham didn't back away. What followed was an aggressive confrontation that ended with Cunningham wrapping Sheldon up in a headlock right there on the court. The moment was impossible to miss, and the reaction came almost instantly. It's also important to understand that Cunningham knew she could face consequences. A flagrant foul and a physical confrontation in professional basketball can lead to a technical foul, a fine, an ejection, or additional discipline depending on how officials view the sequence. But in that moment, Cunningham appeared more focused on making sure Clark knew she wasn't alone. She had watched her teammate deal with repeated physical contact throughout the season, and she chose to respond when she believed the situation had crossed a line. That decision transformed Cunningham's public image almost overnight. Video clips of the confrontation spread rapidly across social media, and fans who hadn't paid much attention to Cunningham suddenly knew her name. More importantly, the incident created a powerful perception around the Fever. People watching Clark endure physical play throughout the season saw one of her teammates willing to step forward and make a statement. The most interesting part of the story isn't simply the confrontation itself. It's what the moment revealed about Cunningham's mentality. She wasn't the biggest star on the roster, and she didn't need to manufacture attention for herself. She saw a teammate getting knocked around and decided she wasn't going to ignore it. That isn't a marketing strategy or some carefully planned publicity stunt. It's what supporting a teammate can look like when emotions take over, and the situation happens in real time. Professional sports have always had players who unofficially become protectors for their team's most important stars. Hockey has embraced that role for generations, while basketball has traditionally handled physicality in a different way. In women's basketball, the idea has been less common and less openly discussed. Cunningham's actions helped create the impression that the Fever weren't going to quietly accept repeated rough treatment toward their franchise player without some kind of response. Fans noticed that change immediately. After that night, many supporters began watching Cunningham differently, almost expecting her to be the player who would step forward if another confrontation happened. The words protector and enforcer quickly became connected to her name whenever people discussed her relationship with Clark. And Cunningham seemed more than comfortable with that reputation. It all started with one clear decision to stand behind her teammate when the moment demanded it. That one unmistakable decision to stand beside a teammate when it mattered most completely changed how people viewed Cunningham. Looking back at the original clip today, it's easy to underestimate just how much that brief moment transformed her public image. Before that game, Cunningham was mainly known as a dependable veteran guard doing the less glamorous work required to help a young roster. Afterward, Her name suddenly became one of the most discussed in the league. It wasn't because she had scored a huge number of points or delivered some spectacular individual performance. Instead, roughly half a minute of completely unfiltered loyalty captured on camera turned her into a viral sensation. Supporters of the WNBA star quickly began discussing Cunningham's willingness to defend Clark, creating an unusual kind of viral attention. She wasn't trying to make herself the star of the moment. The attention came because she was standing up for somebody else. Cunningham defends Clark. Move ahead to 2026. And the attitude that began with that confrontation was still very much present. During a Fever-Mercury matchup, Phoenix's Alyssa Thomas made contact with Clark around the throat and neck area, pressing her fist against Clark's neck during a sequence that immediately reminded many viewers of some of the toughest physical treatment Clark had experienced during her career. No foul was called during the play, and the incident wasn't reviewed immediately while the game was happening. Clark eventually left the contest with a back injury, and Indiana lost 111-109 against the Phoenix Mercury. The Fever later confirmed that Clark was dealing with a back injury, and that she would not return to the game. Thomas was subsequently suspended for one game by the league over the incident. This time, however, Cunningham's response didn't happen through another physical confrontation. Instead, she used her own platform to speak about what had happened. On the following episode of her podcast, Show Me Something, Cunningham addressed the situation directly and didn't hide her frustration. She explained that if Thomas had done something similar to any of their teammates, the Fever players would have been furious. Cunningham also said she believed Clark was being targeted and criticized the league and referees for not doing enough to protect her. But she also made an important admission about what she personally witnessed. Cunningham acknowledged that she hadn't actually seen the specific contact happen live. She explained that none of the Fever players had seen it clearly in real time, because if they had, she insisted they would have immediately stood up for Clark. That honesty is significant. Cunningham wasn't pretending she had witnessed something she hadn't. She wasn't simply creating outrage for attention. Instead, she was expressing genuine frustration over the fact that she hadn't been in a position to react physically, and had to use her voice afterward to make her feelings known. Since she couldn't step in on the court that night, she used the platform she already had to speak publicly. Fever head coach Stephanie White echoed that frustration after the game, criticizing the way Clark had been officiated and describing the situation as unacceptable. WNBA legend Lisa Leslie also spoke publicly, arguing that the league needed to do better. When a teammate, a head coach, and a respected Hall of Famer are all expressing concern about the same situation, it becomes much bigger than one player simply complaining after a difficult game. It suggests that the incident affected people beyond the individual players involved. There's another part of this story worth considering. For everyone involved, the easiest option would have been to say nothing and allow the league's review process to handle the situation privately. Coaches can face consequences for publicly criticizing officials, while players can also receive fines for comments that challenge league decisions. Yet several people connected to the Fever still chose to speak openly. A teammate, a head coach, and a basketball legend all expressed concerns despite knowing there could be criticism for doing so. That says a lot about how strongly the situation affected those who work with Clark and know her personally. What makes this part of the story especially meaningful is how many different forms the support took. It wasn't only about Cunningham committing a hard foul or confronting someone on the court. It was also about a teammate being willing to attach her own name and reputation to a public statement and say that she didn't believe what happened to Clark was acceptable. She knew that speaking so directly about officiating could potentially lead to a fine, yet she chose to say it anyway. For Cunningham, staying silent apparently felt worse than accepting whatever consequences might come from speaking honestly. It also reveals something about the relationship between Clark and Cunningham. This support didn't appear to be something Clark requested. Clark didn't publicly ask Cunningham to defend her, make a statement, or criticize the league. Cunningham brought the issue up herself at the beginning of her podcast episode because the incident had clearly stayed on her mind after she learned what happened. That's an important distinction between genuine support and something done simply because someone asked for it. Nobody needed to give Cunningham instructions. She chose to address the issue on her own. Think about how differently things could have looked if the situation had been reversed and Clark had been asked to comment on a hard foul involving one of her teammates. Many star athletes choose to avoid officiating controversies that don't directly involve them, because speaking publicly can bring plenty of criticism, while offering very little benefit. Cunningham didn't treat this as somebody else's issue. She treated it as something that happened to her teammate, which made it important enough for her to address publicly, even knowing there was a potential risk of discipline. One finger point said everything. Not every example of teammate support needs to involve a dramatic confrontation to make an impact. Sometimes the smallest gesture can become just as powerful. One of the most talked about examples came later in the season. On June 22, 2026, during a Fever Mercury matchup at Gainbridge Fieldhouse, Cunningham found herself at the center of another moment that would quickly attract attention. Cunningham became involved in a tense exchange with Phoenix's DeWanna Bonner after Bonner directed some pointed comments toward Clark. Cunningham's reaction quickly became another viral moment, but this time she didn't make physical contact, commit a hard foul, or escalate the situation. Instead, she simply pointed toward Bonner with a calm but unmistakable expression. That small gesture said more than a long argument ever could. As the situation unfolded, Cunningham appeared to let the gesture speak for itself while everyone around them reacted to what was happening. The Fever eventually won the game 86-77, but the final score wasn't what people remembered most. The finger point quickly spread across social media and became one of the most replayed Cunningham moments of the season. What's especially interesting is that this particular example of protecting Clark didn't involve physicality at all. By that point, Cunningham had already established such a strong reputation that one simple gesture carried serious meaning. She didn't need another confrontation or dramatic physical response. Everyone watching already understood what that finger point represented, because they had seen the pattern developing for more than a year. That's the more interesting evolution of Cunningham's role. A reputation built around protecting a teammate can't depend entirely on physical confrontation, because eventually opponents can predict it and even attempt to provoke it. The Bonner incident showed that Cunningham had another level available to her. She combined restraint with a very clear message. She didn't need to shout or continue the argument. She allowed the moment to happen, made her position obvious, and then let the situation end. There was no extended altercation, no additional confrontation, and no need for another dramatic scene. It was one brief, controlled moment that communicated exactly what she wanted before everyone moved on. The speed at which the moment became part of the team's fan culture was also remarkable. Supporters inside the arena immediately recognized what had happened, and within a short time the gesture was circulating throughout social media. Fans began referencing and recreating the finger point, including supporters far beyond Indianapolis. A simple gesture aimed at defending a teammate had become something that the entire Fever fanbase could recognize almost instantly. That kind of reaction is more meaningful than it might initially appear. Fans don't usually turn a random gesture into a lasting symbol, unless they believe there is something genuine behind it. People weren't simply sharing the clip because it was funny or dramatic. They were responding to Cunningham once again positioning herself between Clark and a developing conflict on the court, this time without throwing a single punch or committing another hard foul. The finger point became an instant shorthand for the same message her earlier confrontation had delivered. If someone puts pressure on our teammate, somebody is going to respond. The response might look different depending on the situation, but the message remains consistent. Another important detail is that Clark never had to respond to the Bonner exchange herself. She didn't need to argue back, explain herself, or visibly react because her teammate had already addressed the tension in real time. That's one of the biggest advantages of having teammates who genuinely look out for you. Protection isn't only about physical safety. It can also give a player the freedom to stay focused on basketball, while someone else handles the unnecessary tension surrounding the game. Think about how much mental energy can disappear during a long professional season when an athlete has to personally respond to every confrontation, explain every controversial moment, or answer questions from reporters afterward. Every situation that demands that kind of attention takes something away from preparation and performance. When a teammate steps in and resolves the issue before it becomes something bigger, the player at the center of the situation can keep her attention where she wants it, on playing basketball. That's a quieter form of support than a spectacular defensive play, But over the course of an entire season, it can be just as valuable. The smaller moments that set everything. Cunningham naturally receives most of the attention because her role has been so visible. But Clark's support system inside the Fever is much bigger than one teammate. Some of the quieter examples may actually reveal just as much about the relationships inside the locker room. After the 2026 WNBA All-Star Game, Clark shared a celebratory Instagram post reflecting on being selected as an All-Star for the third consecutive time. Her caption was simple and appreciative, focusing on how grateful she was for the achievement. Clark had earned another All-Star selection and was celebrating the accomplishment with her supporters. But the comments underneath the post were especially interesting. Fellow Fever All-Star Kelsey Mitchell responded with an encouraging message telling Clark to keep being herself, while Aliyah Boston added her own words of support and reminded her that there was more to come. Neither comment felt exaggerated or designed to attract attention. They came across as simple messages from teammates who genuinely respect and appreciate the person they share the court with. That's important because Mitchell and Boston weren't distant observers celebrating Clark from the outside. They were right there with her at the All-Star event, representing Indiana together. All three players had earned All-Star recognition during the same season, with Clark, Boston, and Mitchell representing the Fever on one of the league's biggest stages. For a franchise that had gone through years without regularly sending players to the All-Star game, having several teammates receive that recognition together represented a major change. Their comments felt less like obligatory congratulations and more like teammates celebrating how far the group had come together. And that makes the quieter displays of support just as important as Cunningham's viral moments. Then there was another moment earlier in the season that added another layer to the story. On June 9, 2026, Caitlin Clark buried a game-winning three-pointer from near the logo to secure a dramatic victory. But the shot itself wasn't the only thing people remembered. What happened immediately afterward became just as memorable. Instead of simply applauding from the bench, Clark's Fever teammates rushed onto the floor and surrounded her in celebration. The entire group appeared to explode with excitement, immediately mobbing their star after the winning shot. Reporters covering the game also highlighted the celebration because it pushed back against the online speculation that had been circulating about supposed tension inside the Fever locker room. The reaction was difficult to dismiss. A team that was truly divided behind the scenes would be unlikely to have its players instantly sprint across the court to celebrate with their star teammate after a game-winning shot. Moments like this matter because they happen too quickly to be carefully staged. A public relations response can be planned, and a post-game interview can be prepared in advance, but an entire team rushing toward a teammate within moments of a game winner is usually driven by instinct. Nobody has time to worry about appearances while the ball is still dropping through the net. Clark for the win. Whatever may or may not have been happening privately inside the Fever locker room, that particular celebration didn't look manufactured for the cameras watching from home. It's also important to take a wider view. The Instagram comments and the emotional on-court celebration weren't isolated incidents surrounded by coldness everywhere else. They fit into a much larger pattern that appeared throughout the season in smaller ways that rarely became major headlines. Teammates arriving early to work together, players gathering around the bench to celebrate big plays, and the ordinary encouragement exchanged throughout games all contribute to a team culture over time. Those repeated interactions can matter far more than one dramatic highlight. The All-Star comments and the post-game celebration simply happened to be moments that were captured clearly and shared widely enough for people outside the team to notice. Smaller displays of support may not generate the same attention as a headlock or a viral finger point, but they can reveal even more. Anyone can create a dramatic show of loyalty when cameras are focused on them. Genuine warmth is much harder to fake in an Instagram comment or during an unscripted sprint from the bench immediately after a buzzer beater. And these kinds of moments have happened repeatedly throughout the season without Clark having to request them. Why Clark trusts Sophie? Through all of this, it's worth paying attention to Clark's own description of Cunningham because her words connect many of these moments better than outside commentary ever could. When Clark spoke with reporters in April 2026 and was asked what Cunningham brings to the Fever, her response focused on something deeper than basketball skills. Clark explained that what she appreciates most about Sophie is that she isn't intimidated by big moments. She said Cunningham rises to the occasion and consistently has her teammates' backs. That wording is important. Clark could have praised Cunningham for her shooting, defense, experience, or reliability. Those qualities may all be part of her game, but none of them was the first thing Clark chose to emphasize. Instead, she immediately highlighted Cunningham's loyalty. When asked about her teammate, Clark's first instinct was to talk about the way Cunningham supports the people around her. That detail gives us a better understanding of what Clark's experience inside the locker room may actually feel like away from statistics and highlight reels. She isn't simply describing a teammate who happens to be physically tough. She's describing someone she trusts. Someone whose instinct to support the people around her doesn't seem dependent on whether cameras are present or whether the moment will become popular online. And that trust appears to work both ways. Cunningham's reputation as Clark's protector didn't develop randomly, and she wouldn't continue putting herself in difficult situations without some genuine relationship underneath it. Taking serious risks on the court or speaking publicly about how the league treats a teammate requires more than a casual connection. The physical moments may generate the most views, but Clark's own words help explain why Cunningham keeps responding the way she does. When you step back and consider the entire season, the bigger story becomes even clearer. Clark entered professional basketball under enormous pressure and scrutiny, yet she quickly found herself surrounded by teammates who repeatedly showed that they were willing to support her in difficult situations. They did it physically, publicly, emotionally, and without needing to be instructed. That's not something a front office can simply create through marketing or team planning. Genuine chemistry either exists inside a locker room or it doesn't. And the Fever roster has provided plenty of examples suggesting that this connection is real. Clark's early seasons in Indiana could have unfolded very differently. A less supportive locker room might have allowed physical treatment to go unanswered, remained silent after controversial incidents, or left Clark to handle public criticism and confrontation on her own. Instead, time after time, another teammate seemed willing to step forward. That repeated behavior across an entire season matters much more than one dramatic highlight. It's what separates a group of players who simply enjoy having a talented young star on the roster from a team that has genuinely embraced her as one of their own. That's the bigger meaning behind Cunningham's confrontation, her podcast comments, and the finger point that communicated an entire message without requiring a single word. It's easy to focus on Clark's statistics and performances, but numbers cannot explain why her teammates continue showing up for her physically and publicly without being asked. Kelsey Mitchell and Aliyah Boston supporting her online, the entire team rushing onto the court after a game-winning shot. Yet together, they help explain why the Fever locker room feels different. If stories like this matter to you, make sure to like the video, subscribe for more WNBA coverage, and share your favorite Fever teammate moment in the comments.